is me. You all know this, permacoach.com.au. So I wanted to start by just revisiting the definition of permaculture. And this is, I always say, my current favourite definition, because one of the things Rosemary Morrow does is to encourage all of us to think about how we're going to define permaculture, and that it's a really good learning exercise to think about if you were going to explain it to someone, how would you do that? So this is my current favourite. It's an ethical pattern for designing integrated systems that restore ecological health while providing for all living things. So it's not just gardening, and the ethics, of course, are our DNA. I really like this representation of the ethics because it emphasises the fact that it's where all three overlap that permaculture actually happens. Particularly in relation to people care, we've seen some stuff where people will say, oh, but it's permaculture because it's people care. And I always challenge that and say, well, hang on, you still need to be looking at earth care, and you still need to be looking at fair share. Not that there's anything wrong with something that's only people care, but it's not permaculture unless it ticks all three boxes. This is something I've been working on. You can tell I've been in lockdown, I've been painting. So this is my permaculture tree. And as well as being a representation of permaculture, this is also our curriculum. So we start at the roots and we talk about all of the different things that informed the development of permaculture. And there's a lot of discussion recently about how much cultural appropriation there was involving Indigenous people. And certainly when you look at some of the later permaculture works, there is no acknowledgement. But one of the things I do notice about the designer's manual is that when Bill Mollison mentions any kind of Indigenous wisdom, he's very careful to acknowledge whose it is and where it came from. But permaculture is not just a lift of Indigenous wisdom, it also draws upon a whole range of other disciplines, including science, including observation, including systems thinking and chaos theory, and more recently quantum theory, along with Indigenous traditions. The ethics are kind of like the trunk of a tree. If you put a nail into the trunk of a tree and come back in 10 years, the nail will still be in the same place. We often think of a tree as kind of continuing to grow out of the ground, but in fact, the trunk of the tree stays pretty stable, and so it is with our ethics. The ethics are pretty much unchanging. The principles are the next layer up, and we pass through the principles. And the reason you can tell something's a principle is that it can be universally applied. So if it's not universal, it probably belongs further up the tree. It's probably a strategy. The strategies are context-based, but they often describe a pattern. So for example, catch and store water. Or slow sink and distribute water and leave it clean from the site, or regenerate zone 5. So they're often talking about things that need to happen over time. And then the elements, tools and techniques are very specific to site. So for example, the way you catch and store water, which is a strategy, would vary enormously depending upon whether or not you're on arid dry land or a temperate location or a subtropical location. The herb spiral off to the side, if you can see it, I always add the flying herb spiral of ignorance, and the flying herb spiral of ignorance is really a hat tip to the fact that some people think that it's the elements, tools and techniques that determine whether or not something is a permaculture system. So the fact that you've got any particular element in your system doesn't make it permaculture. It's very much about the relationships between those different elements and the way that they are connected to each other. So most of us do start learning permaculture by learning it in the garden, but it can be used to design anything. And David Holmgren's Permaculture Flower is a really good reference for all of the different things that he sees it being applied to. So, you know, things like finances and economics and health and spiritual well-being, things that aren't necessarily anything to do with either gardening or agriculture, although of course in permaculture, everything's connected. You can't talk about those things without talking about how our food is produced and how we interact with other living organisms. I do like Ro Morrow's quote, which is, "I am yet to find a design task that cannot be improved by permaculture." And she's, of course, applied it in refugee camps and staging camps overseas and seen massive improvements in the quality of life for people and a reduction in the impact they have on the ecology. So the next level up the tree are the principles. And I think the important thing to remember is that the principles provide an integrated framework. They're not a menu. You don't pick and choose which principle you're going to apply in which situation. The idea is that they act as a framework to help you become a better designer. There's a lot of discussion over whether people prefer David's or Bill's. I actually think it doesn't matter so much which set you choose. Ro Morrow has a set. There's another couple. Someone said to me once, there's over 42 different sets of principles. What matters is that they're not a menu and you don't pick and choose, because there's a risk you'll miss something critical if you do that. So by all means, try David's, try Bill's, try another set. But ultimately you need to kind of pick a set and stick with them. This is a really good representation of Bill Mollison's ethics and design principles. And it's also a reason why a lot of people don't teach Bill, because there's a lot more complexity here than there is to David's, but I actually really like them. It's very common to see people start with David and move on to Bill. And I think the reason is that there's some subtle differences between the different sets of principles. But when we teach, we let people choose. We say, look, if you have a favorite set, use those. This is my macro pattern for all of the principles. So this happened a couple of years ago. We had a situation where it was Cecilia McCauley said to me, Meg, no one can remember them. There's too many of them and you can't apply them practically. We need something that captures both Bill and David and every other set of principles, and we need it to be simple. So this is what I came up with, which was it was inspired actually. I kept trying to think of a really useful model, and then Ro Morrow turned up at Milkwood's teacher training and talked about how a lot of the symbols in David's principles are not very useful when she goes into refugee camps in other parts of the world, because they're very Western. So images like a worm, for example, when you go into a refugee camp, they have a whole other association for worms. They don't see them as necessarily a good thing. There's also culture she goes into where they don't see horses. There are places she goes where they don't see trees. So having those kinds of symbols was problematic. And she said, it was the first time I'd met her, and she said, you know, I need something as simple as my hand. And it only took me about 3 months to figure out that maybe I could use a hand, and that would be as simple as a hand. So the idea of these is that they're a macro pattern. So they don't replace the principles, but they're a really good way to distill them into something that's a usable tool. So the 3 core ethics are on, I like to think of them as being on the palm of my hand. So everything I touch is impacted by those 3 core ethics. And then the principles can be distilled down to aligning your behavior with those 3 core ethics, building diverse and resilient communities, cooperating with nature, designing from the macro to the micro, which I prefer to patterns to details, because it really is about starting big and then layering in more and more and more detail. So we start with these very big patterns like climate and big patterns to do with wind and water. And then as we come down to our microclimates and we get more and more focused on our site, we get right down to the micro life within our soil. And the final one is energy is everything and everything is energy. And that was one of those big epiphanies that came about listening to Ro Morrow talk about how every human-made thing on the planet isn't something from the natural world, because that's where overwhelmingly most of our resources have to come from. So the mobile phone you hold in your hand isn't a rainforest, isn't a tiger, isn't a whale. Energy can only change form. And it encourages us to think about, you know, when we're going to lock some energy up into something human-made, what it isn't instead. But also it's about using energy at its highest use and using energy efficiently when we're designing. So we're always trying to be more and more energy efficient. So as I said, a good idea is to pick one set. I actually agree that variety in the principles is healthy. One of our permaculture principles is that we value diversity, and that includes diversity in the model. I really like the fact that it kind of invites us to think about our own set of principles and to move between them for different design tasks. This model is the one that predates the tree. Some people find the tree a bit hard to get their head around. So here it is as a pyramid of wisdom inspired by Nick Ritter from Milkwood. There's still the design, the herb spiral of ignorance off to the side. But basically we start with what are the influence of permaculture. We move up through the ethics, the goals, the principles, the design process, the strategies, and then the tools and techniques. So now I'm ready to talk you through the design process. So this is I call this my design spiral for evolving systems. And I want you to, for anyone who's done any design work, you will recognize that there are all kinds of models that look very similar to this. There's a plan, do, check, act model in business management, for example, that a lot of people are very familiar with. So design spirals are not a new thing. But what do you think it is about this design spiral that makes it so different to the other design spirals? And the answer is it's the ethics and the principles of permaculture which sit at the center of the design spiral and which touch every stage of it. So you could, for example, apply every single stage of this to strip mining. You could explore and learn all about the mineral resources in the earth. You could imagine the best possible strip mining. You could plan it and then you could implement it and maintain it. But it wouldn't be permaculture because it would be inconsistent with those ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share. And that's why we talk about this as an ethically based design model. It's not the only ethically based design model. Buckminster Fuller has one. The Eco Village Network have one. The Systems Thinking School has an ethically based model. But this is ours. This is the permaculture one. And it's certainly very different to the sort of design models that you see in landscape architecture or business management, things like that. So here are some of the things that we've designed using this model. Homes and bits of homes. So for example, we've redesigned kitchens, bathrooms, pantries, waste systems, wardrobes, garages, toilets, and bedrooms. So you can actually use this model to redesign any part of your home. Businesses, including a motor mechanic, and that was Shannon actually asked her brother, who worked in a motor mechanic business, could she do a permaculture design on his business? And it was so successful, they actually changed the organisational structure across the franchise. We've used it in volunteer and government organisations, and I thought I'd talk you through how we used it in our local produce share. So there's the very lovely Kerry Anderson, who you all know well. Kerry and I went to the Permaculture Convergence in Canberra and heard some really inspirational stuff about, well, they were called produce swaps. And in the car on the way home, we thought about what we might do here on the Central Coast in relation, and particularly Matcham and Holgate. So there were other produce shares already operating. We weren't the first on the Central Coast, but we did want to look at what others were doing and whether there was any interest in our community. So the first part of that design spiral is explore and learn. So we found out we asked these, what are other people doing? What does our community think and feel about a produce share? Is there any interest? Will it help us to achieve the core ethics of permaculture in our local community? So does it help to advance earth care, people care and fair share? And then we looked at the logistics, so the who, what, when, where and how of setting something like this up. So this is a very similar thing to the sorts of questions you might ask if you were designing a garden. You'd have a look at what others were doing in your own area. You'd have a look at what was going on in your community, particularly in relation to resources that might be available. You'd be thinking about those 3 core ethics and the logistics of what you might be doing. We also did a ROCS analysis, and ROCS is my redesign of a SWOT for anyone familiar with SWOT. But instead of strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats, we go risks and opportunities, challenges and strengths. I think the language is a little nicer when you're dealing with clients. SWOT is also meant to move from the internal to the external. So strengths and weaknesses are meant to be the strengths and weaknesses inside your organisation, and opportunities and threats are meant to be the opportunities and threats outside your organisation. But of course, we designed from macro to micro, so we flipped it. So we start with, instead of opportunities and threats, we talk about risks and opportunities, because a risk is very different to a threat. A risk is something that may or may not happen. A threat is kind of imminent. So, and it's really important to respond to risks. The strengths and weaknesses, I don't think saying to any client, what are your weaknesses, is likely to give you really good answers. Most people don't want to talk about where they're weak, but most people are really happy to talk about where they're challenged. So as an example, the ROCS analysis, the most recent ROCS analysis Graham and I did, we identified aging as a challenge. I would not classify that as a weakness. It's just something that we're going to have to deal with. Remember too that when you're doing something like this, you're using a tool like this, Bill Mollison said the problem is the solution. So we don't actually classify a risk or an opportunity as one or the other, or a challenge or a strength as one or the other, because it can be both. So the challenge of aging is also something that might be our strength, because we're on a 25-plus-year-old permaculture system, and we by now pretty well know our stuff. So while we might have increasing physical limitations, we've also got a whole lot of knowledge and a really well-established system. So getting older is not necessarily a bad thing. So when we had a look around the different produce swap events, we found many of them had some kind of valuing system and may as well have used money. So there was one in particular where people would be given tickets. So somebody at the front door would determine what your produce was worth, and you would get that many tickets. And then you would go and purchase other items using your tickets. So to me, that was just an additional level of complexity on just putting prices on things. We also observed that people with little or nothing to share were often embarrassed to attend. So they felt like they weren't welcome if they didn't bring something with them. Sometimes the initial interest was high, but it dropped off, particularly if there was not enough produce. So if people turned up and there was nothing there wasn't a lot of reason to go back. And we felt like we needed to shift the culture from one of this to that to one of generosity, and that also produce shares were about so much more than just the vegetables. They're really about building a different kind of economy and a different kind of community. So just to recap, we've done our explore and learn. So that's at the end of it, that's where we were up to. And now we move on to imagine. So imagine is the part of the design cycle where you can get out all your favorite design tools, and it's really a lovely place to play and to think about what if. And one of my favorite things to do is to use the ethics and the principles as a design tool. So if this system was a world-class example of it, what would it look like? So for example, if our produce share was a world-class example of earth care, well, we would be talking about organic, locally grown, pesticide-free, there'd be no plastic, people can walk there, and we would use renewable human energy to set it up and run it. And so at each stage of the design cycle, I like to integrate the ethics and the principles. I do this in Explore and Learn as well. I actually work through the ethics and principles and say, so to what extent can I see earth care, people care and fair share already happening? To what extent can I see relative location being deployed? To what extent can I see energy being put to its highest use? So that at each stage of that design cycle, you're kind of hooking back in to these ethics and principles. When we're teaching, we use the 5. So when we're teaching, we say to people, you know, to what extent does this location currently align with the 3 core ethics? To what extent have they built diverse and resilient communities? And we work through those 5 that I showed you earlier. And it makes it a really efficient way of ensuring that your ethics and your principles are covered. And that's really what makes permaculture design different. You know, you can design lots of different things, but they won't necessarily be permaculture designs. So then we moved on to thinking about what strategies, elements and techniques would we use within this design, and we wanted a clear, ethically based culture that was linked to permaculture. So we wanted, when people turned up, we wanted to be able to talk with them about permaculture. We looked into all the different options as far as where we could hold it, and we decided it would be great if we could find a commercial venue prepared to auspice our insurance. One of the problems that a lot of produce share events have is that they need to raise money to cover haul, hire and insurance costs. So ideally, we were looking for a local business that were prepared to auspice us. We wanted it to be run by volunteers from the local community. And we decided that for those people who had no produce to bring along on the day, what we would do is offer the opportunity to make a donation to a local charity. So you could say to people, look, if you've got nothing to share, that's okay. $5 for an individual, $10 for a family, and we'll make sure that money goes to a local charity. And we always advertise who's getting it. So we've supported Coast Shelter, the local rural fire service, Holgate Public School, Erina Heights Public School, Wildlife Ark, and a whole range of other charities. And on a number of occasions, someone from the charity has actually attended, and they've been there handing out their information or giving a little speech about what it is that the charity does. So it makes it really comfortable for people who don't have any produce to bring, because they know they can put $5 in the jar and now they feel fine about being in the space. We really wanted it to be a safe space for building friendships and community, and we wanted to shift culture locally from catch and store my own stuff to one of local abundance and generosity. So one of my issues with David's principles is he has catch and store energy, and Bill Mollison has put energy to its highest use and redistribute surplus. And I understand that fair share does kind of imply a redistribution of surplus, but it's not specifically stated. So there's a real risk that people get caught up in this kind of self-sufficiency trap, where they think that permaculture is all about making sure that you can provide for yourself from your own backyard. But in reality, permaculture is all about building resilient and diverse communities. I'm not a beekeeper, but I have friends with bees, and they love the fact that I have a garden full of flowers, and they're really happy to share honey with me because they know that the honey is coming from the flowers in my garden to their beehives just up the road. I don't have chickens, but I have lots of local friends with chickens who are really happy to exchange eggs for produce from my garden. And it's this idea of local abundance that was something that Kerry and I were particularly keen on. That, you know, if all you grow is pumpkins and you have a produce share locally, then you have an abundance of diverse produce, because you can take your pumpkins along and you can come home with all kinds of different foods grown by other people. It's also great. We're in 3 valleys. So the Matcham Holgate area are 3 fingers of valleys that stretch out. And that means some people have got a lot of shade. And that, of course, limits what you can grow. So the people who've got sunshine can grow the things that need sunshine, and the people who've got shade. So we get lots and lots of leafy greens. Leafy greens only need about 4 to 6 hours a day. No, 2 to 4 hours a day of sunshine for leafy greens, 4 to 6 for anything fruity. So not as much as you would think. Obviously, some things will do much better with more sun. So now it's time. We've done Explore and Learn, we've done Imagine, and now we do some serious planning. And obviously I'm skipping a stone across this. This is something that we cover in depth in our Permaculture Design course, but I think it's still helpful for everyone to get a bit of a flyover of what the process is. So now we've done all of this work. We've explored what it is that we're doing. We've learnt some information. We've done some imagining about, you know, if this was the best possible thing we could do, what would that look like? And now we develop a plan. So important to remember that plans are really just a snapshot in time, but systems are dynamic. A lot of people put enormous amounts of time and energy into very detailed plans. I prefer to go with something that I call a concept plan, which gives you a different areas allocated to different things, and then you fill in the detail on the ground. The reason is that I very rarely see a plan translate exactly from paper to the ground. Bill Mollison always says the map is not the territory. So the plan is just a representation of what you're hoping to do, but invariably once you start putting your spade into the ground and finding a rock that you didn't know was there, or discovering that your soil has a different pH to what you thought it did, you start shifting. And of course, we're also dealing with significant shifts in our climate as a consequence of human-caused climate change. So systems are more dynamic than they've ever been, and are more unpredictable. So planning for that is very difficult. What you really need to do is to have this, if you have a look in the bottom corner, you'll see spirals within spirals. And I say to people, you know, sometimes just do this cycle on a little bit of your garden. Just explore and learn, imagine, plan, implement, and maintain. And then do it on another bit, and then do it on another bit. And gradually you'll get the hang of it, and you'll feel more confident doing the bigger design stuff. So the other reason that we plan is that planning gives us an opportunity to think about the right order for doing things. So there are some things like earthworks that you've really got to do before, you know, imagine planting all your beautiful fruit trees and then bringing in earth moving equipment. It's going to be a disaster. So planning is not just about drawing a picture on a plan, it's also about project management, and it's thinking about how you're going to implement all of that. Now I need wine. Wine. Cheers, everybody. So getting back to the produce share, we decided we would set culture, and our culture is we will give generously with no expectation of return. This is a radical concept. You're just going to give stuff away? What? And in fact, the first few months we were running, that was the most common response. People would say to us, so let me get this right. People are just giving food away, right? Is that how this works? Yeah, yep, that's it. People are just giving it away. And consistently the feedback we got from people who were bringing food was, I didn't realize how abundant my garden was. Like, I've brought along all this food to give away, and I go home and I still have food everywhere. Like, I have so much food. And it gave people this real sense of security, and this great sense of abundance that between us, we can all feed each other. The second principle is to receive gratefully with no obligation of debt. This is also a radical idea that you can just say thank you for something. You don't need to give something back. And again, this is about shifting culture. It's okay to say, yes, please. Thank you very much. Share fairly and take only what you know you'll use. Again, don't be greedy. Really stop and think about it. Okay, the turmeric looks beautiful, but how much turmeric are you going to eat in the next 3 months? Do you really need the whole thing? What's interesting is, first of all, we always announce these at the start of every produce share, which is always a fun thing to do. But what's been interesting is we've only, I think, 2 or 3 occasions had anybody not behave this way. And when people don't, other people enforce it. Other people get really upset when people come into this space and start behaving in a way that is greedy and not considerate of others, which we took to be just a huge recognition of how easy it was for this culture to become second nature, but also how welcoming it was. We really enjoy being in a space where this is how we interact with each other. So they're radical concepts for many people, but all of them benefit the planet, all of them benefit people, and fair share is at the heart of them. So you can see how we've kind of woven permaculture into the way we designed the produce share. There were other parts of our plan. The really nice thing was we just put a call out on, I'm the admin on the local community page. It nearly folded and I put my hand up to take it on because my background was policing and I know that building community makes people a whole lot safer. So I was really into it. And at the time I took it over, people were behaving rather badly. And someone said, you do realise it's full of people behaving badly? I said, yeah, I used to be a superintendent of police. I'm pretty sure I can handle a Facebook page. Turns out it's not hard. You do what David Holmgren says in Retro Suburbia, you set culture early and then you maintain culture. So when you set up really clear rules and then when people break those rules, you go in and let them know that that's not okay. We just put a call out over the Facebook group and said, Kerry and I are thinking of setting up a produce share. Is anyone interested? And we had this gorgeous group of people turn up, including Nadia from Fires Creek Winery, who wanted to host the event. So we found not just a private venue prepared to auspice our insurance, but a winery and a really beautiful garden. So it's this glorious location. We decided to get matching aprons instead of name tags. If you're setting up a produce share, that's a great idea. People can tell from any direction whether or not you're one of the people involved in running it. They don't need to see your chest. We set up on the second Sunday of every month before we realised that was a Mother's Day clash, but it hasn't been a problem. We promoted it on the community page on Facebook, and we decided at our first meeting that success for us would be if 8 other people turned up, and that from time to time we would also run permaculture workshops as part of the produce share. So this is where we're up to in the design cycle. So that was the plan, and now we come to the implement and maintain part. Remember, it's a spiral, not a circle. So each time you travel around this, the idea is that things improve. You don't just go round and round and round chasing your own tail. Each time you come through implement and maintain, you will be exploring and learning, and then you'll be imagining different ways of doing things, and then you'll be doing some more planning and some more implementing and maintaining, and hopefully improving, but always linking back to those ethics and principles in the middle, always coming back to saying, okay, how much more could I align this with earth care? How much better could I align this with people care? How much more could I redistribute to the ethic of fair share? Because from a personal perspective, Graham and I are finding that even after 30-something years of doing this, you never run out of improvements to make. You never run out of better ways to do permaculture. The other point I like to make about implementation is remember when you're implementing something new that initially the energy you need to put into it is significant. So I'll use chickens as an example. When you first get chickens, you know nothing about chickens, or you've read a book about chickens, and now you're on a very steep learning curve to learn lots and lots and lots about chickens. But you're also trying to integrate taking care of the chickens into your day-to-day routine. And what that's going to mean is that initially there's going to be some creative discomfort there. Eventually it just becomes second nature. You know, I've got a sourdough starter in the kitchen. It's my habit to get up in the morning and put more flour in my sourdough starter. That's just what I do every morning. But initially when I was getting it going, it was something I had to remember to remind myself to do. So when you're implementing stuff, be very careful about trying to do too many things all at once. If you think about it as being a commitment of time and energy that initially is very high and then tapers off. When it gets to that kind of second nature stage, that's a good place to implement something else. Not trying to do too many things all at once at the beginning. That's when you get overwhelmed and a bit exhausted by it all. So how did we go? Well, we've been running the produce share now for over 2 years. The lowest attendance we've had was 37. I need to check, that might have actually, since COVID, Kerry Anderson, we might have gone a little lower than that. I think we've had one around 25. But the highest attendance we had was 89. In any case, we had no trouble ticking off 8 people. We've had plenty more than 8 people. We've raised over $2,000 for local charity, and we've had regulars join the team. So we're always looking at that pattern of succession and thinking about, well, you know, how do we make sure that this keeps going? So that's Kerry Hodge, who was turning up every produce share with loads and loads of plants. Kerry's an artist and has a show garden, very, very talented in horticulture and propagation. And so we said, would you like to join the team? We had Ingrid Osborne, who's local real estate agent, but also very big on building community. And we asked her to join because she was there most weeks anyway. And that's a really good way to build a team, is find the people that are turning up and ask them to join in. But wait, there's more. Here are some of the other benefits that have come out of running it. We've all made new friends. So some of these people are now my very good friends. We've run 5 workshops, including one on composting, one on food growing, one on reducing plastic waste. We've shifted local culture, so that's apparent because the community page, it's now routine for people to give stuff away. So previously people would only sell things, but now it's really common for people to say, oh, look, I've got a bookshelf, would anybody like it? I've got a filing cabinet, I've got, you know, the other thing that's happening is that people are really happy to ask when they need stuff. So recently we built, some of you will have seen us live streaming the king beds that we've put into the garden here at Matcham, and pretty much everything that's gone into them has turned up for free because we just put something out on the community page and said, oh, well, we need, anyone got old roofing metal, preferably in a pale colour? And sure enough, there it was, donated for free. And of course, we're keeping all that stuff out of landfill. So the community page now has become a kind of extension of the produce share, or the produce share is an extension of the community page, I'm not sure which. But what we're definitely doing is creating that diverse and resilient community. And the idea that we don't necessarily have to have the same politics or religion or opinions about things, but what we can do is to come together and share community and share food and share mutual respect for each other. So here's a little design task for you. Do try this at home. See if you can redesign your wardrobe using permaculture. So we do this on our intro course. It's actually a really fun game. So look at that design cycle, and first of all, explore and learn. How aligned is it currently with the ethics and the principles? What would it look like? So move into imagine. What would it look like if it was the world's best example of a permaculture wardrobe? Would you ever need to buy another item of clothing again? That's a good question. Or would you have enough clothing to last you for the rest of your life? And then you might decide to come up with a plan, and you might decide to implement and maintain. And I do acknowledge that some of you out there have got pretty awesome permaculture wardrobes. I know, because I've had you on our course and I've heard about what you're doing. So for those that don't already know, this is my blog site where I variously ramble about all kinds of things permaculture related. And then, of course, we're at permacoach.com.au, and we're on Facebook as Permacoach. And that's where you'll find out, if we're ever able to have real life courses again, that's where you'll find out about our courses. So now I need to stop presenting and go back to this, don't I? There we go. Terrific. Well, I hope that was, I know that wasn't Susie German, and apologies again for those who joined us late. Susie was unwell this evening, so I jumped in and did something on the permaculture design cycle, and hopefully that's given you a little bit of enjoyment in lockdown. And I'm very happy to answer questions if anybody has questions. You might need to wave at Marcos or something. Oh, thanks. Thanks, everybody. Nice comments. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Everyone should have the option to unmute themselves as well. So.
Oh, okay. So people can, if you want to, you can unmute yourself and ask me a question. Marcos is telling me. So.
Yeah.
I just unmuted myself. I'm on iPhone. My name's Joe.
Oh, hi, Joe.
That was so interesting. And yeah, I wasn't here from the exact beginning, but I've caught most of it. How do we get a part of this market that you do?
Oh, the Matcham Holgate Produce Share is the second Sunday of every month at Fires Creek Winery at Holgate. Thanks for asking, Joe.
Okay, let me just put this in my notes. I'll just type it in.
Yeah. So obviously during lockdown, we've been unable to run the produce share, but you know, it's been really nice. People are putting stuff out on the street all up and down Matcham.
So what's it called? Matcham Holgate Market?
Matcham Holgate Produce Share.
Produce Share.
Produce Share. Everything is free.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
I haven't got much. I've only just recently started, but I got some time and.
Oh, wonderful! That's wonderful. And you know, you can always come and make a donation. Just make a donation to.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking. You know, like as I get better at it, and yeah, I just wanted to know how to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So, do you have people that come there just to help out in other ways?
Yep, we have people turn up early. We have people stay late. We have people packing tables away. We love it. It's really great. We always have herbal tea in winter, and then Nadia will often do some kind of a elderberry spritzer thing with a bit of fruit wine in it for summer.
Yeah, and obviously you're going to learn. I don't want to take up too much talk time, but obviously you're going to learn so much being amidst it all. Yeah. So that to me is like, I wouldn't. Yeah. That's what I'm really interested in too. Just like hands-on learning. So thank you so much, and I'll stop talking. I'll turn my speaker off, and thank you.
You're welcome. And we have a Facebook page, the Matcham Holgate Produce Share, and we do notify on the Facebook page when it's happening. And you make a great point, Joe, about learning. I know recently Karen turned up and bought beautiful sweet potato from her garden, which is grown just for the leaf. I didn't even know it existed. Didn't even know it was a thing. And then came around here with her husband Patrick and walked the garden, and we had this great time because her understanding of plants is from a different perspective to mine. So we spent all this time going, oh, I use this for this. What do you use it for? Oh, I use it for that. So you just never stop learning. It's one of the great things. one of the great things about food and gardening and permaculture is there's no limit to your knowledge. Every year I learn new things, and the produce share has been amazing for just meeting people. You know, people turn up with stuff I've never seen. I had never seen a Malabar gourd. I had no idea what it was. And now I eat them all the time. So yeah, it's terrific. Thanks,
Meg,
everyone.
Meg,
any other?
Yeah, it's Janine here, Janine Ziller. Thanks so much for that rundown. I came in a few minutes late, so one of the questions I had is, my husband and I have just bought some land a couple of hours north of here, just east of Gloucester. And when I say just, we're talking only last week we settled. So it's 100 acres and we want to turn it in, yeah, so we're kind of out of our depth in a big way. Ronan has been kind of entrenched in permaculture a lot more than I have. I'm really at the beginning stages. But our vision for the land is to build, you know, a huge food forest and kind of give back to the community. So we're not looking for it to be a profit-making business. We want this to be somewhere where we can take a break away at the weekend and also and give back essentially any vegetables that we can't eat because we've got so much, we'd like to give that back. Do you ever get interest from people like from this group or anyone else that might be interested in helping us kick off this journey? Because we're really literally at the first week here where we are sat with pen and paper going, okay, where do we start? Let's start with a small little plot, start small and then just incrementally grow. Like, do you ever get anyone to say, I'd love to volunteer for a weekend and help us out?
Sure. So 100 acres, you need a good plan. Get in touch with Brett. Get in touch with Brett Cooper from Limestone.
Rose Dunkley's course.
Great. Okay, so I'd be bringing Brett in to do a whole of site design for you before you do much else, because when you're talking about the scale of permanence, the damage that you can do to 100 acres is significant. You know, the sort of damage you do doing earthworks on a suburban block is most of the time an inconvenience. You can sometimes end up with a bit of damage to foundations or shifting or water, but the sort of damage you can do to 100 acres if you don't get that stuff right up front is the difference between successful 100 acres and failing 100 acres. So definitely get someone like Brett in to do that macro plan for you. Once you know where you're going, you can certainly put something up on the Permaculture Central Coast Facebook group saying what you're offering. So you know, is it accommodation, is it meals, is it paid work or unpaid work? And just put something up and say, would anybody like to come and spend some time? You can also connect through woofing. My preference is to invite local people. My experience with woofing is that you get people coming from different bioregions and the things they're learning aren't necessarily useful. And also so we teach in exchange for help. So our students don't pay money for their courses, they come and help out in the garden, which we thought was just going to be a fair exchange. But like so many things in the alternative economy, it's so much more, because now I have this amazing network of awesome friends who all love permaculture. So, you know, last week we had a whole bunch of ginger and arrowroot that needed to be dug, and we're thinking, how are we going to get all that out? And Marcos and Will turned up, and it just happens, you know, magic stuff happens. So even the possibility of running a PDC on the land in exchange for people helping, or running workshops where you pay the workshop presenter, but then local community people attend for free. Because that way that works really well, and we've done a bit of that locally. So you have someone come up and run a workshop on. So Susie German, who couldn't be with us tonight, did a great workshop at Killcare on bush regeneration, and the owners of the property paid her to do the presentation, and then members of the community came for free.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's
and everybody wins. Everybody wins. You know, they got, I think, 12 people moving mulch for the day for a lot less money than paying a landscape gardener or someone else to do it. The people that came loved it. So yeah, give some thought to that. But be in touch, you know, get in touch with me, and whatever we can do to support you doing that, we'll do.
Thank you. Thanks.
Any other questions? Are we all done? Oh, look at us go. 7:28. 2 minutes left. Okay, everyone, I will say good night. Thank you very much for joining me and for the lovely feedback. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited about 100 acres at Gloucester in permaculture. We're all going to come visit. You should come visit. When you can, come visit, come stay.
Done.
So we've got a flat, so you can come stay and have a look around and take lots of plants.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Appreciate that.
Do that.
I mean,
we do a lot of that.
To quantify the goal, it's more to try. The goal is to build up enough produce to feed 50 families on a weekly basis for free. That's kind of the end goal, and we're working backwards from there.
Awesome. Yeah, come see me.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Thank you very much for everybody who joined us, and stay safe. Remember, if you are not coping with lockdown, please reach out. You're in a wonderful permaculture community now, and there's plenty of support out there for anybody who needs it. The same goes if you are struggling with food. There are lots of people in this community who have produce who are happy to share it, and you don't need to be embarrassed to reach out and ask. So please, if you need support, whether that is practical, physical support or emotional support, reach out to someone in the community. We're all here to help each other out. And yeah, and we look forward to actually being able to hug you all very soon. Okay, good night, everybody.
Thank you, Meg.
And thank you, Marcos. Oh, hello. How are you? Good to see you, Karen. I was talking about your beautiful
sweet potatoes.
The turkeys ate mine. I'm going to need to get some more from you, but I want to come see your garden.
Oh, please
one day.
Come. Yeah, please come one day when lockdown is over.
one day when we can. I will be coming.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of your evening.